Welcome to our webinar. This is on the new resource guide that launched as of yesterday and today from the Young Adult Rare Representatives YAR. This is healthcare decision-making for young adults with rare diseases. And I'm very excited to be sharing this with you all. You'll hear a little bit about the process and the intent and how we got here, including a lot of YAR members' feedback. But I will just say this has been a journey, and I'm very, very glad to be sharing this all with you. Just a thank you as we start off. I want to thank the people who actually made this resource guide and webinar possible. Thank you to our sponsor, Elevance Health, and thank you to all of the YAR members who were involved, either in our initial focus group, in giving feedback on the design and content of the resource guide, or in many cases in offering stories and testimonials. You can see folks' names here and on the homepage of the guide itself, just as a heads up ahead. I am Courtney Felly. I'm the Patient Engagement Fellow here at the Every Life Foundation, and day to day, I do a lot with our Young Adult Rare Representatives program. I'm going to pass it to Cleo first to introduce herself, and then Carter.
Hi, my name's Cleo. I'm a hydrocephalus survivor, brain surgery survivor, and patient advocate.
Hi, I'm Carter. I have Meniere's disease as well as some rare complications from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Thank you so much. You're going to hear a lot more from both of them later, but I just want to start off giving a sense of what our agenda is and where we'll be going, and then starting off going through the YAR Healthcare Guide. First and foremost, we're going to talk a little bit about where this actually emerges from. I think help contextualize why all of this information matters and is organized like this. I'm also going to walk through what the different parts of the YAR Healthcare Guide include and where. I think that's really helpful, especially to figuring out where to find information. And then we'll sort of get into how this is that you can apply this to your own life and decision-making as a young adult. And then we'll do an open discussion and Q&A throughout. So yeah, let's sort of get into it. I want to go back just for a second to some housekeeping before we get too involved in the details. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a CC button, a closed caption button, if you would like to see live transcription of today's event. And we also have a Q&A box that will be open throughout the webinar. So if you have questions as we go, feel free to put them in there. You can also put them in at the end when we're doing our open discussion. And I will also note you can put things in the chat either to us as panelists if you have comments or additional stories, or you just want to hype people up. I will note it's Cleo's birthday, and I found this out earlier today. So if you want to wish her happy birthday in the chat, I did make sure I could say this and invite people to do this. Please tell her happy birthday. I feel like speaking on a webinar on your actual birthday is very impressive. But I want to get started just actually opening the Healthcare Guide website page and taking y'all through it. So here you can sort of see how this pulls up. When you are on the actual Every Life website, this is the YAR Healthcare Guide landing page. If you're just coming into the website and trying to find it, this is the main YAR overview homepage, and it's living under here, designed by for young adults. You'll see when you get to this overview page with all the general YAR info, it's all the way up in this right corner, where if you click this, this will take you right to the homepage. This main page with the 4 icons is really where all of the information is housed from. So you have everything with the introduction and everything else with the context. This started a while ago in terms of, over time, a lot of YAR members talking about their own experiences in healthcare, their own journeys, and oftentimes the questions that they had when they were newly diagnosed or when they were transitioning to adult healthcare, depending on the age when their rare disease onset and the exact type of rare disease that they had. We had a lot of people who, in various ways, were talking about trying to share tips, sometimes commiserate, about how complicated and overwhelming it can be to try to navigate healthcare. And so increasingly, we really wanted to think about how this tied into the mission of YAR in Every Life. It's really hard to get to the point of being on Capitol Hill and meeting with your legislators and talking to them about your story if you still feel very uncertain with where you are in the diagnostic or the healthcare process. How is it that you actually get to the point of being confident enough and stable enough in those advocacy skills to get all the way to Capitol Hill if sometimes it's a challenge to get through a doctor's appointment? And this isn't easy, right? This is back and forth. I say this as someone who also has an underdiagnosed rarish condition and frequently has these issues myself. But a lot of this original inspiration, and then of course some lovely sponsorship, got us to the point of being able to do this, which is just share some information, resources, tips and tricks, and also stories, testimonials from YAR members about what everyone wishes they had known sooner, information that can help throughout this process, to try to limit the barriers that you face, and also just help you figure out how to address them in the process, how to make you feel like you have the most power and sway over the very important healthcare decisions that do matter to you, your rare disease, and your life. So with all of that, I'm just going to start walking fairly slowly throughout how the guide looks. Things are broken up into these 4 stages, and these are based on time frame of where you might be in your journey of seeking healthcare or going through healthcare. And this will ping around over time. None of these are meant to be one static point of a healthcare journey, but instead where you are cyclically at any given moment in time with seeking healthcare for a certain issue, a certain symptom. Sometimes you might be suddenly seeking a new insurance provider, going back to the earlier stage. It really depends. So stage 1, how do I set up my health insurance, is all about that initial step of anything that happens before you're even considering seeing a doctor, figuring out which provider, figuring out like how to actually cover an appointment, schedule an appointment, prep for an appointment. This is about everything you would need to get out of the way before you even feel comfortable enough or ready enough to do so. So I'm going to click on stage 1. Either the icon or the question will take you to this page that has some of the sub questions and sub pages. So in this section, a lot of setting up health insurance is what's important. What is actually available to you? How do you choose between options? Especially for the YAR age range, roughly around 26, based on your circumstance in your state. How is it that you transfer to your own health insurance plan? What does that look like? What do you need to know? How do you plan ahead for that? Since I think a lot of us are very stressed out about what that looks like. Same thing too with actually understanding your options between plans, or understanding a new plan once you do pick one, understanding the plan you're on. Same thing with figuring out how to communicate with your health insurance provider. Even once you're on a plan and you're trying to understand what your benefits are, you sometimes need to reach out ahead of time to see what it is that's actually covered and how, before you can even get to the point of scheduling it, right? And then, of course, the perennial and very important question, which is how do you seek additional assistance for healthcare costs? So as an example of how some of these subpages look, I'm just going to click on the additional assistance for healthcare costs one, and go through how all of this is set up. I love everyone actually wishing happy birthday to Cleo in the chat. That's so positive. Thank you all. So this is how a lot of the subpages and sub questions look. This goes through essentially different larger checkmark items. So if you're looking for a particular piece of information, I would really recommend scanning through these larger checkpoint bolded sentences first and figuring out what category something might be in. For example, you scan the top one and you realize, oh, okay, like hospital services are obviously often more expensive, a little more unpredictable, harder to plan ahead for, more of a crisis situation. So we're starting off with, if you are being treated in hospital for something, what are the ways that you can try to financially address that, receive assistance, generally afford what might be a crisis level of healthcare. So you can see some different resources, different text, links available. We have a quote here from YAR member Nicole. That's a very to the point quote about hospital assistance. A lot of pages will have quotes, different tips and tricks littered in. And then if you scroll down, you'll see here, this bolded point is about patient assistance programs for a wider array of healthcare costs. So maybe you're looking for assistance on something that is fundamentally unrelated to hospital care. You're looking for copay assistance on just an average outpatient appointment. You're looking for help affording medical equipment or medications or other more expensive services, and you want to see what's actually out there. This would be the section of this page that's more for you, right? So I think that's where scanning comes into play, starting to go through these pages. If I scroll back up to the top where you have this picture of all the YAR members, you can click the question to go backward in the guide. Of course, you can also do that at the top with just the general back arrow. But I think it's nice, especially if you are on mobile or based on how you like to navigate web pages, to know that that's an option. So I'm going to go all the way back to the initial homepage area. Since we're in here, stage 2, how do I plan ahead for my healthcare needs, is a lot on figuring out how to actually find new providers, what services you need, how to set that up for yourself. So if I click on what information should I keep regularly available for healthcare encounters, this is a good sort of set of information on what it means to like be ready enough to go to an appointment. Like what information do you sort of need to figure out like what's most relevant for you, what's most important, which symptoms you really need to follow up the most on. There are two different PDFs in here. This is one of them. And when you click on it, you can either download it up at the top at this button and save it to your laptop, type on it, or you could print it out directly, depending on how you prefer to use it. And you'll see here, this is very much around your information and your use. So you can click off as you trace different information, keep your records updated, and have all of this to bring into new appointments with providers. Have all of that context for yourself and also to improve what it is that they know about you and can help with. So if I go back to the guide itself, and I go back again, stage 3 is where a lot of the meat is around actually meeting with providers, figuring out what it is that you need to tell them in real time and making sure that you're set up for an appointment. Especially if you are seeing someone for the first time, a lot of these resources can be really helpful around what it is that you actually need to share most with them and how it is that you can test out what your relationship over time will look like, what your care plan will look like, and what your overall healthcare team will look like to make sure that you're actually receiving the best care possible for you. So for example, if I click on how should I prepare for an upcoming appointment, this is where the other main PDF is. This is for preparing for an upcoming medical appointment. And a lot of the information in this guide is very much designed so that you can return to it or go not in a chronological order based on what it is you need at any given moment in time. So you could essentially download this and update it, or you could print it off every time you have a new appointment if you wanted to keep track of upcoming appointments that way. I will note, I noted this right before the call started, but related to my own condition, I actually printed this off to use and sort of jot down notes based on these questions in a notebook at a recent rheumatologist appointment. And that was incredibly helpful. And I will be doing that again, despite the fact that this is no longer a new provider. So something like that is really what the template is designed to be used for. You can see here that there's information on writing a short pitch of your rare disease, planning out specific goals for the appointment. So for example, mine was really wanting to pursue like a specific kind of genetic test and seeing if there were other therapies or medications available based on what might work a little bit better. So something like that might be a goal. You might just have the goal to like adjust the dosage of a medication if you're having weird side effects, just to talk through and update your care plan with your doctor. It's really up to what you think would be the most helpful way to think through specific detailed goals, to think through what matters to you most going into a new appointment, so that you can make the most out of it, and also so that you can ask the right questions and receive the right information from your provider, and they can support you in the best possible way. So this is sort of what this looks like. You can see down here, this is where you can prepare questions for your provider. We have some different sample ones, especially if you're seeing someone new. A lot of the anxiety, I think, of seeing a new provider and figuring out how they're willing to support you, what their general dynamic is like, what their office environment is like. There's a lot that goes into that. So being able to actually sort of suss out the right questions, you can also plan your own for what you want to ask and how. And especially if you're bringing this in print to an appointment, you can of course write on it throughout. Again, it really is designed to be however you think it's most helpful to use these. Going back to the resource guide area with this section too, this is really for anything that would be in an appointment. So there's also, what happens if an appointment doesn't go as well and you're realizing you really need to switch to a new provider? What happens if you leave an appointment or you're prepping for an appointment and you don't totally know how to explain your rare disease symptoms? You don't totally know like how to actually like ask the perfect questions to your doctor for your specific rare disease. How do you find other folks in your community or in the larger rare disease community who can help? I will note I actually in part got my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis because I heard someone describing a very specific symptom I also have. And I was like, hold on a second. I'd love if you could send me some information on what you actually called that, what that looks like, because I never had the words to describe it that way. So something like that would fit here. And then anything around scientific publications. I will note, especially for a lot of rare diseases, this might also be where talking about clinical trials fits in. There's hopefully some upcoming stuff we could add around this, but anything about navigating your healthcare in real time and talking to providers about it. And then finally, going back to this main resource guide page, This last section here is just about what happens after an appointment. It's happened, you've left, you're in your car on the way back, someone else is driving you, you're, sitting around after the fact, trying to figure out like what to do next. How do you follow up on all the new information? How do you make sure that you're continuing your healthcare in a consistent way, keeping everything sort of on track as best possible for you, right? So here you'll see a section that Carter will talk a bunch more on later about organizing your records after an appointment. How is it that you maintain and keep all that information? And then there's also a section on continuing to navigate healthcare and going through your healthcare journey as a young adult rare disease patient who might belong to several marginalized communities. So I will go back to the initial homepage with all of this. If there are ever questions about where something is, you're looking for a specific link or resource that you know is in the guide and you want to find it, there is a master list at the end, which is a page that just has the plain links of everything that is in the hub in different ways. So if you're like, I know that there was something about insurance. I don't remember exactly what page it was on, but I know that it was a good linked guide. You could, for example, search and just look up insurance and see which of these resources fits with what you're looking for. And this will stay updated over time as we potentially add new resources and as ones are referred to us. So this is where that will all be housed. So you'll see, the way that this whole page is laid out, all of the other information here. So with all of that, I know this is a lot. In terms of what's here, I think what's really going to be more helpful is figuring out how it is you can also apply this to your own life where the stories and journeys fit in. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Cleo first and then Carter to talk a little bit more about their quotes in the hub and how they sort of see their healthcare journeys fitting into this.
Hi, everyone. So I know that was a lot, but you can always go back to it and read it. I'm just going to be giving you guys my advice as far as navigating with a rare disease or really just any disease. So first, when I am looking for a new doctor, I will find one first through my insurance website or just call them to verify that that doctor is actually covered, because I've had so many times where they weren't. And it's a headache when you have to go back to the website and then it's like you have to call the insurance again and be like, hey, they're actually not covered. But anyways, a very important thing here is to make sure that they are board certified, and you want to make sure that is for your safety. And then a second thing you can do to minimize that anxiety when you are looking for a new doctor is going on healthgrades.com. And for me personally, if they have over a 4.0 health grade, I'll feel a little bit more at ease, especially when it's regarding neurosurgery, because you just don't want anybody drilling holes in your head. And they do not have great reviews, right? And then also you can ask them key questions about their experience with your rare disease, such as how long have you been treating this disease? What is your advice regarding my symptoms? What should I be looking out for, and so forth? And what is their methodology in case they cannot answer that question, because doctors do not know everything. And in my experience, I've had a neurosurgeon that literally told me that he didn't know what to do with me. And then the next neurosurgeon, there was a case where he didn't know the answer, but he actually sought knowledge from a colleague to better assist me. So you want to make sure you have a doctor that cares about you and is going to make sure that you are getting that patient care. So that is definitely my advice in preliminarily navigating your rare disease.
Thank you, Cleo. I'll be talking a little bit more about what you can do after your appointments and between appointments. Making notes after an appointment can make future appointments less overwhelming. My first notes are lingering questions, next steps to take in my care plan, and the most important information I learned. Then I make a checklist of any referrals to follow up on, medication or treatment changes to talk to my pharmacist about, and any further appointments I'll need to book so that I can check them off when I'm ready. When I get some time later at home, I revisit those notes on any new diagnoses and any tests being done to do my own research to better understand my needs. Making short lists from these topics helps me to remember my appointments and also breaks down my experience into smaller parts that are easier to process later. It's important to organize appointment information so we can better understand our medical records and make informed decisions about our care moving forward. I know that's a lot of different points, so I can share an example of how I put this into place and adjusted it for my own experience. I recently saw a dietitian and I used my little notebook to make some checklists. First, I started with the big points that were my big concerns, like food strategies and alternative hydration with gastroparesis. After that, I made a small checklist of things that I would want to pick up at the store or at the drugstore when I went out. And I noted a medication that came up, so I would follow up with my GI and wouldn't forget. Later in the day, when I had some more time, I made a quick little list of other appointments I should book and other providers to follow up with to make sure records are getting sent back and forth. And then I also set a reminder on my phone for later in the week so that I could go back and check my patient portal while my dietitian uploaded their notes, since sometimes providers might include information that's different from what we discussed, or more detailed information that I didn't remember clearly. This can totally vary for you where you are in your health journey. It might also include information like following up on a letter for accommodations or updating your medical alert information later. Taking notes really helps, especially for me because I have trouble remembering details and can get stressed out during appointments, like I'm sure many of us do. And so just making a short bulleted list when we get out of an appointment while it's still fresh can really go a long way to helping. For more long-term organization, I like to keep those notes in a little notebook so that I can carry it to and from my appointments, or so I can leave a checklist on my desk so I can reference it later. I also like using folders or binders to put all my notes in, like bringing a folder to and from all of my appointments because I can just throw it in my bag and have my old records in there to reference in case they didn't get passed between providers, or if I get any new handouts or business cards or pamphlets, I can just put them in there and they don't get a chance to get lost. Other people might find it more helpful to keep things in one centralized place at home. Some people might prefer keeping it all virtual, like taking your notes on a smartphone or your computer, or just downloading everything into a Google Drive folder. So really experiment with what works for you to keep track of your records. Some of my biggest advice would be that it can be challenging to coordinate our own healthcare, but learning little tricks to stay organized and on top of it can really empower us as young adults to ensure that we make the best and most informed decisions for ourselves. So don't be afraid to ask questions and share your thoughts with your healthcare providers along the way. It should be an ongoing conversation, and it's okay to say no to treatments or procedures, or it's okay to advocate for yourself if you really want something to happen. You can even ask your providers to make a note in your records if they choose not to pursue what you want at the time. But I think the best piece of advice I have is to connect with other people with rare and chronic conditions and just communicate with each other, because I know some of the best information I've gotten for keeping track of my records has come from other people with my rare diseases. So finding patient organizations like Every Life or more specific to your rare disease if available, or even just local or online support groups for generally with people with chronic health conditions, we can do a lot to support each other, sharing information and helping each other search for answers when they're not available. These aren't skills that are often explicitly taught to us and can be even more complex as young adults learning to manage our time and change insurance, or having rare diseases, having to maybe travel for specialists or not have access. But self-advocacy really starts in these medical centers and with the choices we make after our appointments and during them. So it can really help coordinate our care between multiple providers or medical centers and ensure that we can always have all the information we need to make the best decisions for ourselves and the most informed decisions in our health journeys. Thank you, and I'll pass this back to Courtney.
Thank you so much, Carter, and also Cleo. I'm going to move pretty quickly just through this final slide and then open things up for questions and discussion. So if you have any questions that you've been thinking on, now might be a good time to put them in the Q&A to get us started. But I wanted to wrap things up with this quote that is on the homepage. This is by another YAR member, Amelia Williams. And it says, as a young adult patient, it is easy to get lost in all the complex details of the medical system. I have found the best way to navigate my health conditions and receive optimal medical care is to be an active member of my care team. Advocating for myself and using my voice in decision-making about my care ensures that I have control over my own body, that I understand what is happening to me, and that I am empowered to make educated decisions when faced with choices that will have major impacts on my quality of life. I just remember reading this for the first time and feeling like this was very much the point of the resource guide. And what I hope that you all can take away today in terms of how this actually fits into what it is that your own healthcare looks like, especially as young adults. There's a lot of advocacy that we need to do to make sure that for right now in our lives and moving into the future, we are receiving the best medical care possible, that we are like empowered to make these decisions, empowered to speak up, to ask the questions we have, to receive answers, and to figure out over time how our entire healthcare looks together, how our providers are working together, how we are in total receiving the best care. So I feel like this is very much what we're going for. And almost to Carter's point too, that as you start to talk with your providers, form a relationship with them, and you see the difficulties they sometimes also face, or you see what some of the larger structural issues are in healthcare, you also have much, much more information and personal stories and policy information to bring into your meetings with legislators about improving healthcare for as many people as possible. So with that in mind, I'm just going to open us up to questions. And as people have them, I can try to ping us back and forth to the actual website. Just depends what people's questions are. I'm going to start us off with a more general question, and then I'm seeing some in the chat that we can come back to, and then also some, if we end up having any in the Q&A, I can sort of point on. But just to get us started, both Carter and Cleo, I wanted to ask y'all if you had ways when you were first looking at this information that you think it could be used in your own personal healthcare journey or someone else's. What was something where you're like, oh, that makes sense to me how this would apply?
Is it in regards to anything specific on the guide?
It could be any part of it.
Well, I can definitely see how, in general, it could, for example, the health insurance. I know that is a very, not a lot of people understand it. What do they do with it? How do you set that up? And there's always healthcare.gov. There's always Google. You can Google how to find health insurance. And you also want to make sure your insurance is there for you too. And that is another battle because you want to make sure your deductible isn't too high. And it's a lot of us with rare diseases, we do not have high incomes because we are chronically ill. So you want to make sure that your premium and your deductibles are something that you can manage as a young adult. So that is the first thing on I would advise in setting up your insurance. And then the other stage here where how to plan ahead for your healthcare needs. First, ask yourself, what are your immediate concerns about your health? And then go from there.
I really appreciate the way this is broken up because I know a lot of guides out there put everything as one big document and it can be harder to navigate. So being able to just pick oh, I'm having a problem with insurance today, and being able to go into there and find exactly what I'm looking for without digging, I really appreciate. And I also really liked the section that Cleo talked about with how to choose a new provider, because it shares some really great information on what to look for beyond just Googling them, like conferences, associations, different ways to find ratings. And I thought that was really helpful.
I think so much, especially of a lot of the resources and information included, is something that we as like rare disease patients often like spend a lot of time or effort trying to find. You both also mentioned like being in community with other people and hearing their tips and tricks over time. What's something that both of you wish you had just known sooner in terms of like a resource or information that has helped you now and that you wish could have helped you right at the beginning of your own healthcare journey?
I wish I had understood how much like power we have as patients to control our healthcare journey. Like we may have to shop around for specialists or see providers we don't really like, but we have more power than we realize, I think, a lot of the time. Like I wish I'd known I could say no to treatments if I knew they wouldn't help me, or that I could advocate for assessments that ended up later bringing answers without having to wait years for it or just sit through things that didn't work.
And I definitely agree with Carter. Carter, you definitely brought up a great point with asking for assessments. Um, I did have one time where I didn't know my anemia got this bad and I was having these weird symptoms. I had to go to the ER, and I was working in the medical field at the time. And I was like, it makes no sense. You guys are saying I'm okay, and I'm telling you I'm not. And I was like, are you guys going to do a CBC panel? And for those that don't know, a CBC panel is blood work, generalized blood work, to make sure your hemoglobins are correct. They're like normal. And come to find out, I was 3 liters away from a blood transfusion. If I had not asked for that assessment, I would have probably stayed in that ER. So always feel comfortable to ask for what other tests the doctor can be doing as well.
Those are both great pieces of advice. I'm actually going to try to come back to this in a little bit too, with a question that I think Carter actually ironically had originally asked earlier in the process about also navigating this guide if you're undiagnosed or partially diagnosed. But I want to go to this question too in the chat. Megan said, I've tried looking at genetic counseling resources, looking up the resource Cleo had shared, looking at a national organization for genetic counseling, and have not found as much success finding sort of those resources. I don't know if either of you have advice or more generally, maybe advice on finding specific resources, information in your own experiences.
I know the NIH has a couple great resources. There's the Genetic and Rare Diseases Resources Information Center that has a lot of information if you know more what area you're looking for, what kind of diseases you're suspecting. Otherwise, they have the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, which they fund. And they're actually open to applications right now with, I think, 18 sites across the country. And they share some different patient stories. There's also the Rare and Undiagnosed Network out there, and they have a really great resource page with just tons of information, other organizations, places to connect with patients. Yeah, I think those are some of the big ones that I know that I've looked into.
I'll quickly jump in to say that Lindsay added the link to GUARD, what Carter was talking about, in the chat, and then also the undiagnosed page. So if that is of interest to anyone, and GUARD for sure is linked like several times in a few different subpages. Cleo, is there anything you want to add? I want to make sure there's also space for that.
Yes, thank you so much for asking. I did want to add, Carter, I'm glad you brought up the NIH. I was going to answer that as well. And then let me see here. Another thing I added, that advice I wish I had known before, is the power in community and patient advocates do exist in hospitals. They might only have one, but they do exist, and you're more than welcome to seek a mentorship with your community, such as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or any other rare disease out there. There are mentors available.
Yeah, I think especially for anything that's like specific around your rare disease, really connecting with folks in your community or like at a patient organization, if there is one for like your disease, can be really helpful. I will also note to this point about genetic counselors. Part of the underlying policy issue here is definitely also that folks who are not like certified doctors in each state might be covered differently. And it's going to depend what your insurance is and what state you're in. Medicaid covers this differently than private insurance would, for example. And if you're interested in some of this like state level advocacy around, for example, getting better coverage, better access to genetic counselors in your state, we have our state advocacy hub that has been doing some work on this. We had a state advocacy day in Boston, Massachusetts earlier this year, and this was one of the main asks. And for anyone who's recently been to some of our federal legislative advocacy events, Rare Disease Week, Rare Across America, the Access to Genetic Counselor Services Act might sound familiar to you. That was also a fairly big ask. So I will just ping all of that on the actual political advocacy front as well, in terms of better access to genetic counseling. Another question I think that's more around like this advice, how to actually apply this, is there's a question in the Q&A that says, any tips on using some of the guide's resources when advocating over the phone is not your strongest skill? A lot of healthcare steps require calling someone to advocate, and sometimes that stops me from seeking an answer when I don't have the energy or space for a phone call. I guess if either of you have advice on this.
I can go ahead and say, I definitely understand what that feels like. Those calls take at least 30 minutes. So back and forth email if you can, or if you have a case manager, I forgot to mention that as well, you guys. You can get a case manager through your insurance. I have one. She's great. She makes my life easier. And she can piggyback for you if you don't feel like being on the phone.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that there are times when you can do it over email or through some patient portals, you can do some messaging and do like e-visits just through that way. And then it really helps me to just make a few notes of what I want to talk about, like maybe even using the template listed in there for figuring out what your big points are that you want to get through.
I'm also actually going to take us to the resource guide for a second for a few different pages. In one of the sections around communicating with your health insurance provider, one of the things that's here, once you're sort of in here, is also about non-phone options. I think especially as young adults, a lot of us know that this is generational. I have so few friends my age who actively like talking on the phone. And so much is set up, especially in more professional scenes, around being on the phone. So one of the pieces of advice here for communicating with providers actually does mention that many providers will have sort of the e-visit or e-chat that Carter was referencing, something along the lines of being able to contact like a customer service representative and talk with them. You can also try to email someone who might be a contact person. And if you are on the phone, and you're rooted to someone, like you speak with a person on the phone for an extended period of time, in the same way you might ask for their direct phone extension to follow up with them, you could ask for their email. You could say, hey, like, I gotta be honest, like talking on the phone is not quite as helpful for me. Like, is there any chance we can continue this? You can maybe send me follow-up resources over email instead, especially when you have that in with a real person. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's also coping. I will make tea and I will sit with a friend to be on the phone with them so that there's someone else helping. So that also I'm just like set up in the most comfortable way to be talking on the phone. And then I will also note, particularly from the access standpoint of how this looks, that if you go to the final section, stage 4, in that question that talks about how do you continue your healthcare journey, how do you navigate healthcare, as a young adult who's part of other marginalized communities as well as the rare disease community, um, there's a section that talks about how it is that you can access translation or interpretation. If you are deaf or hard of hearing and you cannot speak on the phone, for example, how is it that you can actually assert those services? What are the sort of legal know your rights you might need to communicate that in the most effective way? So some of that is also in here, if that is also the angle that you're coming at this from. I will just note all of that too. Um, And Carter just put in the chat, for anyone looking into genetics, recently learned, cannot pronounce this. Someone said this in our focus group too. I think it's Invitae, which has affordable telehealth or genetic panels with financial assistance available across the US. I know from someone mentioning this in the focus group that it does sometimes work with your insurance plan as well, depending on your situation. So that might be something to look into depending. Yeah, definitely too, like Megan in the chat mentions being forwarded like a UK genetic counselor's guide, but especially with some ultra rare conditions, like it might also help to look for other folks who have like similarly situated like genetic conditions, but it's not quite the same deletion, it's not quite the same mutation, really depends. I think what community meets everyone might be a little different. But to get us also back into like a lot of this larger discussion, I want to open it up to talking about like if you're undiagnosed or partially diagnosed, what might be the most helpful, what's really helpful early on. So Carter, Cleo, I'm going to open that up to both of you if you have any advice on this.
I know that the National Institute of Health, NIH, they did establish an intramural research program for undiagnosed diseases in 2008. So it's been a long time. So you can definitely go on their website and really look into that regarding your rare disease or any symptoms that you may have that have gone undiagnosed. And also community helps to, if you are having certain symptoms, like Courtney was stating earlier, was that she was diagnosed based on someone else's symptoms and it come to find out they were much similar. So that helps a lot.
I absolutely agree on talking with other people. I know sometimes in online support groups or even in my local support group, I've learned about things that I didn't realize there was a name for, and just being able to talk to other people can help bring some insight or at least help us feel less alone. Also, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network is a great place to look because they do a lot to actively help people figure out diagnoses and also just share plenty of other resources and information.
I will also note for the guide itself, if you're looking through, sometimes it can feel a little more difficult to advocate for yourself in the process if you're not totally sure what your rare disease is. Maybe you're facing a lot of like dismissal or like you haven't quite hit the right relationship yet with your medical providers. Some of the information there about like bringing in scientific studies, some of the information about like prepping for appointments, like figuring out what your questions and goals are might be really helpful. There is also a link in one of the subpages that is a toolkit from Global Genes on being undiagnosed, being an empowered undiagnosed patient specifically. So in that process, how is it that you are still trying to maintain those relationships with providers, ask the right questions, and maybe maintain your records in the right way so that you know what tests have been conducted, what's been ruled out, what hasn't, and how all of that looks. In all of this too, like this sort of time frame, like the span of what everything looks like, I wanted to ask you, like Carter and Cleo, the best tips you also have for like maintaining relationships with your providers. Like how is it that you like sort of see if a provider is someone that you trust long term? How do you deepen that relationship? How do you make sure that you have like a point person for certain symptoms that you can go back to with questions that you can work with over time?
I know one thing for me is just making sure when I have other things that aren't in their specialty come up, that records do get sent over and shared with them, and that when there are any major changes, I at least send them a message. That way we keep some kind of communication, and even if it's not enough for us to have like a whole appointment and sit down together, we can at least do an e-visit, like just messaging. And then also keeping track of records and contact information so that I know I can go back to them.
I turned off my video for a second to sneeze if you watched me go away. But Cleo, I wanted to ask if you have anything to add, mostly about like maintaining those relationships, figuring out that trust.
Pretty much the same thing as Carter. You want to build rapport with the doctor, but first you want to make sure that you feel understood. And if I do feel understood, like for example, I do not leave the doctor's office until all of my questions are answered. And it could be really tough. So I write them down because I do have short-term memory loss. But that'll basically build rapport, and it lets the doctor know that, oh, wow, these are definitely heavy concerns. We'll document this in her after visit summary. Want to keep in touch with that. And that's how I remain close with my medical providers.
Yeah, I think like what you both are getting at too is that sometimes providers just quite frankly have so many patients or so much information that also being able to keep that really clear for you both in one place can be so helpful. Like to have that transparency both ways where you all have the most updated information, the clearest information that you can reference over time. That can just quite frankly be incredibly, incredibly helpful. I'm gonna like see if folks have other questions just for a moment, take like a brief pause to see like if folks can add that. I'm also gonna add Carter in the chat said, I also like to finish appointments with when should I see you again to have a time frame or know what symptoms would prompt another meeting. That's always a good question. Also, so you've talked about it, you don't show up to the front and then they like give you a really weird estimate of when you're gonna see the provider next and you're like, that, I'm not sure that makes sense, right? Like you have the opportunity to talk that through. Um, what do you all think are some of your like green flags in providers, especially when you see them the first time, to like feel comfortable like bringing up all of these questions, really feeling like you're getting good answers?
For me, it's when they show me my brain scan so I can actually understand what their medical jargon is and see what they're talking about. Yeah.
I like to check right from the beginning, like if they're familiar with my health conditions or rare diseases, and then if not, if they're willing to learn about them. And then also just kind of getting a feeling of whether or not they believe me about my symptoms, because I know that's been an issue with some providers. If they don't understand something, they might not believe what's going on, or they might not be willing to investigate it. So just the willingness to have an open conversation about things and what their feeling is toward pursuing things, even if they don't understand them.
Are there ways that you all feel you communicate differently now with doctors than like when you were first diagnosed, or maybe when you were like a teenager, like right at the beginning cusp of young adulthood, like things that you feel like you've learned over the course of this, that are ways you go into an appointment, right? You've prepared for the appointment that you feel like make you a stronger patient advocate.
I think for me, earlier in my journey with healthcare, especially not really having many answers and not knowing how to advocate for myself, I tended to go in with not much of a plan for what I wanted to address, and then just go with whatever my provider thought. And so it was more just me going and listening to them and doing what they say than having a conversation and asking questions and being able to really find out all the different details of the benefits and risks of different treatments. So now I am more inclined to be able to ask questions instead of just saying yes to a treatment, even if I'm not sure what it means, or just dealing with the risks and side effects. So I think that has just been helpful for me, getting that confidence to know that I can ask questions and it's not going to offend people if I do. And if they are offended, then I need to find a new doctor.
Yes, most definitely the same here. Another thing that I do differently now is whenever they are prescribing me medicine, I ask what those side effects are and do they affect any other medicine? Because having to find out after I take it, it's really scary. And I've had that happen to me. Um, but yes, just being open and asking questions, and definitely follow Carter. If they are offended by your questions, please run.
We had one of the YAR members too earlier on, to Cleo's point about also asking about side effects and how medications interact. This is also a question that you can ask to your pharmacist if you have like a regular pharmacy you go to, or someone behind the counter when you are picking up your medications. Usually they can also run through with you if things do interact, and see if there are like any really easy swaps, maybe from like brand to generic if you're more comfortable with that, right? Depending on what it is that you actually need and prefer. So that's also someone who's just a resource for you. Um, it just sort of depends what you're looking for, and what is the most helpful. I will note too, like having recently moved to a new city and trying to set things up in a very different way. I use forearm crutches, and I recently had the green flag of a provider, like realizing mid-appointment that I had them because they were propped up behind me. I'd been sitting when she walked in, and being excited that I was like taking the right steps to protect my joints, being excited about how they were decorated. And I think having a provider who knows how to interact with you, like as someone where this is your life, like you are the expert on how this looks day to day, can be really positive. Someone who figures out how to talk to you about how you're really experiencing your condition, and does not automatically only think in like the medical terms, can provide their medical information, can break down the jargon and show you the scans, right? And throughout the guide, we have some of that information on like understanding scientific details, also understanding the terminology and vocabulary of health insurance, which can also be very jargony. So if any of that would also be helpful, especially if it's earlier on and you're getting acquainted with what all of that looks like, highly recommend some of those resources too. Um, but I want to ask as we sort of close out, to both you, Cleo, and Carter, if there are any last pieces of advice or stories you haven't gotten to share yet, just any last points about why and how all of this matters.
I will add that all of this matters is because you never know who you're helping when you're advocating for yourself. And it could be anywhere, it could be online, it could be through another family member that's kept quiet about a rare disease or symptoms. You just never know. And I do like to add that you can be an advocate in any way just by spreading awareness about your rare disease. I do it really artistically through writing, or they're just posting, like I'll do my hair and makeup and I'll post something about how I'm feeling that day. And that's another way you can connect with others by advocating for yourself.
I absolutely agree with Cleo. Advocacy can be a lot of different things. It can start in a lot of ways. It's not always going to Congress and talking in these meetings. It's also just asking questions in our medical appointments or sharing about things online. And while healthcare providers can be the expert on a lot of things, like related to health, we are the experts on our own experiences, and we know our symptoms best. We know ourselves better than anyone.
I absolutely love both of those final comments. I'm just going to move this as I sort of wrap us up, to this slide with contact information. The top is for both me and the young adult rare representatives. The middle one is for Carter, and the last one is for Cleo. So if you do have any follow-up questions for any of us, please feel free to take a screenshot, a picture of this slide. Generally keep all of this information. If you do have any follow-up questions about anything we've talked about, or anything we maybe haven't touched on that you want to learn more about, please feel free to follow up with me, cfelli@everylifefoundation.org. This is also to return so much earlier to Lindsay's question, where you can send information and stories over time. So for example, if you are looking through the guide and you realize that your patient organization has another resource you like, or an advocacy nonprofit you're also involved with is coming out with something soon that you think would fit, please feel free to email. This can sort of live on. If you have stories that you want to share about your own diagnostic odyssey, your own healthcare journey, anything in between, feel free to reach out. We can also connect you with resources. And same too with other questions about advocacy in every sort of step and ramp that gets you to Capitol Hill and then all the way to Capitol Hill. So thank you all sort of for coming and for talking through all of this. And really appreciate everyone too in the chat, like talking throughout, sharing their own stories and just generally being so positive. This is lovely. And if you do want to return to this webinar, this is going to live as a recording on the actual homepage of the YAR Healthcare Guide. So it's going to be in that section right near the alphabetized resources. If you'd like to come back to it, rewatch it, share it, anything of that kind. But other than that, I hope everyone has a good night. I hope Cleo has a good rest of her birthday. And just in general, good luck everyone with your advocacy and your healthcare. All of these resources are very much designed to support you. But this whole process, like, this is in your hands. Like, you truly do have like this as your healthcare. You deserve this. So with that, thank you for watching.